in the week, my co-host Sarah Whitmire talked with Andrew Coulson from the CATO Institute. Let's see a little bit of their interview if we could.
Thanks, Stan. I'm joined on the phone by Andrew Coulson of the CATO Institute. Andrew, let's begin by discussing this idea of school referendums. More and more districts are turning to referendums to prop up their general funds to do things such as pay teacher salaries. In your opinion, is this the way we should be funding schools?
Well, actually, the way that we're funding our schools, I think, should be quite different. Rather than voting on what schools are paid, based on the research I'm familiar with, it seems that it would be much better for parents to pay directly for schools and to ensure universal access to education by providing financial assistance to low-income families so that everybody can participate in the marketplace. A much more efficient system of education arises when you have parents paying directly rather than trying to get funding through an electoral process.
2 years ago, Indiana switched its funding model. It used to fund schools through property taxes. Now it's being funded through sales taxes. In your opinion, should Indiana switch back to its previous system?
Really, I would have to say that the particular taxes used to fund an education system has very little effect on school efficiency, on whether schools are meeting parents' expectations, on the quality of education they're providing. It's much more important to determine who is paying for schooling and not so important to focus on the taxes. So any debate over the source of taxes used is really missing the point.
Explain how market-like school systems work and what your research shows about the impact they have on student outcomes.
The most market-like, freest education systems outperform centrally planned education systems like we have in the United States, and this is consistent across every measure that you could think of, from school achievement or student achievement to efficiency to parental satisfaction. And what really distinguishes the market-like school systems from the kind of public school system we have is that there's vigorous competition, there's free entry. Anyone who wants to open a school is able to. Parents have complete choice as to where they send their children to school, and parents also pay a little bit of the cost of their own children's education directly. And this turns out to have a big effect on how efficient schools are and how responsive they are to parents.
It seems like some may argue that a market system would create classes of schools, really the haves and the have-nots. Is that an accurate assumption?
Actually, the contrary is true. When you have free competition, you tend to get the lower performing suppliers dropping out of the market so that all those that remain tend to be relatively comparable. And you can see this, for instance, in any market that you look at today. So, for instance, if you go out and buy an iPhone, you're going to get a pretty good phone. But if you go out and buy a Motorola Droid X, a competitor, you're also going to get a pretty good phone. There are, in fact, no phones today that you could buy that would be outrageously expensive and dysfunctional. They simply couldn't exist in the marketplace because no one would buy them. And it's the same with education. When everybody is allowed to freely shop for the best schools for their children, the terrible schools can't attract any parents, and they fall by the wayside, leaving only better quality schools behind.
Your research talks about requiring parents to pay tuition for their children to attend school. You even say schools become more efficient as the share of the funding that comes from parents becomes larger. Two questions here. First is, can you explain in more detail your idea for a tuition system? And secondly, an obvious question, what about those parents who say they can't afford to pay to send their kids to school?
Yes, indeed, you definitely need some kind of financial assistance mechanism to make sure that every family can afford good quality education. So then the question becomes, what is the policy that allows that universal access to the marketplace without interfering with the freedoms and the incentives in running a school that result in schools being very efficient and innovative and high quality? Well, it turns out that the best policy seems to be one of reducing taxes on middle-income families so that they can more easily afford private schooling, and providing scholarships to lower-income families so that they can go out and buy schooling as well.
An increasing amount of local, state, and federal money is going into education, and the cost per pupil keeps going up. How long can this continue?
That's a very good question, and the answer is not very long. In several states, the combination of rising per pupil expenditure on just operating expenditures for public schools with the dramatically growing unfunded liabilities for teachers' pensions, basically promises of payments for teachers' pensions that have not in fact been funded by states, is becoming just a monumental problem. And states are going to have to do one of a small number of drastic things to resolve this question. One of them is to simply renege on the promises to teachers' unions for these benefits that they simply can't afford anymore. And I think that would be very unpopular, essentially like declaring bankruptcy. A much more elegant solution is to offer school choice to families so that they can afford, through these scholarship donation tax credits or through personal use tax credits, to choose private schools for their children. The tax credits are much less expensive than per pupil spending in public schools, and so the more parents that take advantage of these private school choice options, the more taxpayers save. And by doing that, the public school system finances could actually be salvaged.
And our thanks to Andrew Coulson, who spoke with my co-host Sarah Whitmire earlier in the week.